Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to give you my November reading wrap-up. In the month of November I read 32 books, as I did a 30 books in 30 days challenge, and I'm splitting my wrap-up into two. So in this half of the wrap-up you will get all of my adult and young adult fiction books that I read, and then everything else is going to be in part two, so make sure you stay subscribed and tuned for that. But without further ado, let's talk about the adult and young adult fiction that I read in the month of November. So first of all, I'm going to start with this wonderful horror book, and that's Everything the Darkness Eats by Eric LaRocca. This is Eric LaRocca writing a debut prose book for the very first time. It's not a short story collection, and it's very hard to talk about what this book is about because essentially you're following this creature who seems to be kidnapping people for a purpose, and you don't know what that is. And at the same time you're also following these two gay men who move into a house in a neighborhood, and they just want to be free from the homophobia that they've experienced in the past. They just want to live their own authentic lives, but unfortunately that might not be possible for them in this town. This book, I feel like it's best described as Paradise Lost meets Annihilation set in the contemporary present day world with some supernatural elements to it. It's a really weird mix that I found absolutely fascinating. It is abstract horror, so if you don't like things a little creepy, a little strange, a bit whimsical, then this isn't one for you, but for me, I just ate it up. The whole time I was reading this book, I was like, I don't know where the story is going, I don't know what this is going to amount to, and you just have to wait for it, because when it gets there, it's so mind-bending and shocking that you're just like, what on earth did I just read? I can't wait to read it again and further process and understand how we got to this point. I do think one of the things that it really touches on and depicts in a very poignant and very intense way is the queer horror perspective, the horror that queer people face while experiencing intense homophobia in the present day world. So while it's definitely got a supernatural strand to the horror, it's also very much got a reality, down to earth horror vibe to it as well, and it's just brilliantly written and so well composed, and I really like this. I acknowledge that it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but it was certainly mine. I also read The Wonder by Emma Donoghue. This is her book, which is set in Ireland, and you're following Lib, who is a nurse, and she gets sent to this small town to monitor this girl who claims that she hasn't eaten a morsel for 3 months, and everybody's saying it's a miracle, and Lib is here to evaluate the girl with this nun to see if she's really telling the truth, and if not, uncover what's actually going on here. Is this girl a miracle sent from God or not? This is one of those books that I read quite quickly. I think the build up in this and the pacing is very good. For what could be a very slow and boring story, Emma Donoghue manages to inject some suspense and some atmosphere and some very good character building into it as well. I loved Lib, our main character. She had a lot of the same skepticisms that I would have had in this situation, and she was just so full of veracity and life, and I just appreciated how she always was checking her sources and she wasn't willing to take things for granted just by what was said. I think how the story or the mystery or what was really happening here unraveled was very realistic. I liked how it was handled. I liked the beats of the story where things are revealed to us, and while sometimes I didn't want Lib to do the things that she was doing, I could always understand why she made the character choices that she did, and she always justified them, and they seemed very sensible. I was satisfied by the end of the book. I did see things coming, but I don't think that was necessarily a bad thing, and I think it might be a me thing, and some people won't see the ending coming at all. The only thing I would say is that it kind of throws in a bit of an unnecessary romance into this to kind of have a little secondary thing, and I don't think it needed it. I don't think it added much to the story. I believed it, but I just wasn't enthralled that it was included. But overall, this was a pretty good book, and I enjoyed also reading and learning more about some of the Irish like mythology and folklore that's woven into the book too. On a similar vein, I read So Late in the Day by Keegan. This is her short story, so it's very short, and this one is following this man as he is going home from work, and on his way home from work he kind of reflects on this relationship that he had with a girl, and you get to figure out what happened with that relationship. What I really liked about this short story was that it was exactly as long as it needed to be. There were no excess words, there was no excess description. If you want a story that's told to you in a way that feels like a story but is just as long as it needs to be, then this is the perfect read for you. It touches a lot on misogyny, and the kind of misogyny that is so inherently deep down within you that you don't realize it's bubbling up and bleeding into the actions that you're committing and you're doing. And it was just slowly seeing it unravel, and how it unpicked and depicted that theme was very, very clever, and I think very, very smart. I would love to read a short story collection that Claire Keegan had written, because I think that she could pull off the short narrative very well while saying something poignant and important, but not overdoing it, not being too on the nose. It was a very good balance, and I really liked this. It was a good reading experience. I read Earthlings by Sayaka Murata this month, and this was 5 stars, a new favorite. It's also one of the most bizarre books I have ever read in my entire life. It's translated, ooh, where's the translator? It's translated from Japanese by Ginny Tapley. When we first meet Natsuki, she is a child and she is going through a lot. She is being abused by many people in many different ways, and she kind of starts pretending with her cousin Yu that they are in love and that they are aliens, and that seems to be a coping mechanism to get them through the abuse and suffering that they both individually are going through. Yu is also going through some things, and then it kind of talks about when she's an adult and how she still believes in the fact that she's an alien. She doesn't blend in with the rest of society. She doesn't understand why people want to blend in with society. And that's essentially what the story is about. But oh my gosh, is it not what the story is about at the same time. This book, I only had to read it in like drips and feeds and little bits, because every time I read it, my heart was hurting. These characters are going through so much, and they are so fed up. Like deep down within them, they're so fed up of not fitting into society, of trying and trying again to normalize themselves. And it's just so painful seeing how many people overlook and ignore their suffering, and just how they struggle to cope with it. There's also a lot of commentary on capitalism and the ways in which we kind of fund the capitalist movement with our actions and our choices and our words. The ending is just absolutely wild. I did not predict the trajectory that this story was going to go down in any which way or form. I would love to meet a person who could, because I don't think it's possible. And it was entirely my blend of sci-fi metaphor, hardcore reality, satire. At some point in this book I was laughing because it was so ridiculous and audacious. Sometimes I was flabbergasted and shocked because I did not expect what they ended up doing, and then sometimes I just felt like my heart was breaking on a constant loop. So if you want to go through a roller coaster of emotions, then I recommend this book to you. Oh, I finished a series. I read the third and the final book in the Bayview High trilogy by Karen M. McManus. This is One of Us Is Back, and it's the last one in the mystery series, and I definitely think you need to read the first two if you're going to get to this one. I'm not going to tell you anything about it other than the fact that this is a young adult thriller murder mystery book where it brings back the characters from the first two books without introducing you to a whole host of new characters like they've done previously for every book. This time you're back with your familiar gang, your familiar cast in Bayview High School. Some of them are older now, they don't go to school, but they're still involved, and it's about what happens when justice is not served in the way that you want it to be served, what happens when you are lying to your close friends, and what happens if revenge comes back to bite you. And I think those are themes that I've been building across the series in the first two books, but in this one it just capitulates in a way that was so befitting the series. I've mentioned before on my channel how I read this series not for the murder mysteries, not for the thriller elements, but for the characters, because I just really like them. In some ways in the first book they are stereotypes of certain cliches, but by this book they've just developed so very much, and it's just so lovely to see where they've ended out and how they are processing their emotions. Get to not only see new couples blossom in this, or couples who are going through rough patches, this is still young adult by the way, you also get to see couples who've decided to weather the storm together from book one until now, and like how their relationship has developed. I've mentioned before how I feel like a lot of books these days focus on the getting together moment and not what it's actually like to be in a relationship, and it was pleasant to see what it's like to actually be in a relationship that you're committed to, but you're still a teenager. And that's another element that I really liked this book. But I think I should also speak to the murder mystery and thriller elements. I think this did it the best that I've seen in this trilogy so far. They've been good, they've had lots of moving parts, but they've never been particularly thrilling. I think this one was the most suspenseful, and I think this one also made the most sense. There are also points where nobody really puts their brain together and solves the mystery. They do need to have a moment where the villain kind of explains everything to them, and I'm so sad that I finished the Bayview High trilogy. Where am I gonna go if I want to read my young adult teenage high school drama with a little side of murder mystery now? Where will I go? Enjoyed reading So Late in the Day so much that I decided to carry on and read my next Claire Keegan book. So I read Small Things Like These, which is her novella where she is talking about a man who similarly is just going about the rounds for work, and he's kind of noticing people and things that seem a bit off, that seem a bit weird, and he's trying to think about what it means to show up for people who need showing up for, especially when it's kind of Christmas and festive time. I read this, I liked this, but I don't really think as much of it as I did of So Late in the Day. It was a nice story, it was a good story, it drew my attention to a happening that happened in Ireland over history, but also in more recent history years that I knew nothing about, which is absolutely awful that it happened. So I appreciate that it opened my eyes to that happening in history. But even though it was kind of heartwarming with its message of like, you need to show up for people, this is how you can show up in small and big ways, it just didn't hit me as much, and I feel like there was more in this that was a bit like talking around the point rather than getting right to the point. I do think this could have been as short as So Late in the Day, but it's double the length of that. Even though that's only 100 pages, it still felt like there are parts of this that could have been stripped back. I'm very strict when it comes to length of books. If you don't need it, don't include it. I was severely disappointed in Learned by Heart by Emma Donoghue. This is what the cover really looks like. So I actually read this one before The Wonder, and this one is following the Gentleman Jack, but if Gentleman Jack was still in secondary school. Gentleman Jack is a woman who dressed up as a man and did lots of things during history and wrote diaries about it. So this is kind of based on that figurine that we often know in the later years, but when they're at school and she is forming a relationship with this girl, which of course didn't typically happen in this historical period, so it's quite unique to get this sapphic story told in a historical fiction lens. However, this book was just really boring. It was just so boring. I had to zoom my way through an audiobook to complete it. It didn't feel like it had any substance. It was building around this one engraving that's etched in glass, which happened in real life and you can go and see it, but I feel like the author didn't have much more else to work with, because otherwise it was just a really boring story about these girls who go to school and the ins and outs of their day at the school. And I appreciate that we got to see a sapphic story amongst this boarding school experience, but it just didn't amount to anything. There was no big turning point, there was no big suspense, there was no big catharsis at the end. It was just really, really dry. I did think lots of the female characters didn't stand out from each other, so they kind of all blended together as one big amalgamation in my mind, apart from our two leads who were in love. One of these two women who we're following is a person of colour, I believe she's Indian, and she is talking about her experience, and it didn't hit the way that I think it could have if somebody else had written it. At one point even the words like "I don't see colour" are said, and that was a big struggle for me because it just took me out of the time period. It didn't seem like it fit the historical period that well. So all in all, this was just a hard pass. I was really bored, and I don't think I would have finished this if I didn't have my 30 books in 30 days reading challenge to contend with. I then was in the mood for reading vampires, so I read Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. This is the book that inspired Dracula, and it's about sapphic vampires, which I really, really appreciated. This has every gothic element to it, beat for beat. If you like those books with the very, very slow build up to the end that's all about haunting atmosphere and vibes and characters more than actually moving the plot along for a large part of the story, then this is what you want. If you've read Dracula, you're going to find it so fascinating because there are so many ways in which Dracula directly drew the lore of the vampirism from this book, and having read Dracula many a time, I was just drawing all of those connections and being like, oh my goodness, this is where this came from, this deserves more credit. It's also a short book, so it's not going to take you too long. I think sometimes with gothic novels it can feel a bit long when it's doing that slow atmospheric vibe build up, but because this is so short it doesn't waste any time and it gets right to the point. I loved the vampires in this, the vampire lore is there, the vampirism is on the page. I do think the ending kind of wrapped up a little bit too quickly, but otherwise no notes. I had a very good time. I read Concerning My Daughter by Hye-Jin, which is translated by Jamie Chang, and this one is about an elderly lady whose daughter says she needs to move back home because she's broke, and her daughter is gay, her daughter has a girlfriend, and the mum is just at this point where she's so old she doesn't really process or want to even process and see past the homophobia that has been building within her for years, and she's very uncomfortable with the idea of her daughter and girlfriend moving in with her, but of course she's not going to turn them away. Now, I've read a lot of queer books by now, a lot of them, but you know what I've never done? I've never read a queer Asian experience that is set in Asia. This was my first time reading about queer people in Korea in a book that is written in Korean originally and been translated, and that was fascinating. I just learned a whole load more about how homophobia manifests over there and some of the ways in which the culture plays into the ways in which homophobia is manifested. That was fascinating. I've also started reading more books with elderly main characters, and their themes and how they think about life is just so fascinating because they understand that time is ticking for them. They understand that it's difficult for them to change even if they want to, and they also understand that they're contending with things that they've lost. There's a mourning process going on within them for themselves, for the agility that they had when they were younger, for the way that they know that they're becoming second-class citizens who people care about less and won't take care of in the same way. There's just so much reflection that happens in this person's head, and even though I didn't like her for a lot of this book because of course she's being homophobic and not understanding to her daughter and her girlfriend, the girlfriend is so lovely and patient in this, but it was just absolutely fascinating. I had to get used to the writing style because there's no speech marks in this one, but I think it's just so worth reading. It's also not long. What I will say for all of the queer people who want to read this book, anytime that the elderly woman says something homophobic, it's not in the book, so you're not actually going to get that homophobia thrown in your face, and I appreciated that because it means it can be less triggering to people who are queer and want to read this but don't want to be triggered every single time they read a book where homophobia is included. It just says like she said some unforgivable things. That's kind of the way that they deal with that problem in those conversations. Absolutely fascinating. It's one of the books that I've been continually thinking about more and more since I read it. I think it does so much for representation, and it's one of those books that I haven't given 5 stars and said is a new favorite yet, but I think the more I process it, the more I think about this book, I definitely think it's going to get there. So even though I didn't give it the full 5 stars yet, I'm going to go ahead and say this is a new favorite nonetheless. So I read She and Her Cat by Makoto, Shinkai and Naruki Nagakawa, and this is also translated by Ginny, Tapley, Takemori. What? Who translated Earthlings? Anyway, this is a short story collection about these people who own a cat, and the story is always about them, a woman, and her cat. Those are what the stories are about, okay? The cats have points of view. This is really important to know. As someone who, I like a good cat, I am not an staunch cat lover. I know, don't unsubscribe, don't leave me yet. I'm just not a fan of cats in the way that cat lovers are so cat people, and so anytime there was a cat point of view I absolutely checked out, and I think I would have enjoyed these short stories if they were entirely from the human's point of view. I just don't do well with animal points of view, and that is that. So for me, this was entirely a case of I picked up a book where I am not the right audience for it at all, and that's kind of all I want to say about it. I will say that I found the stories to be quite slice of life and a bit mediocre. I don't think all of them ended at the conclusion of the story. I think there could have been more said there, and they kind of interconnect in the way that the cats interact with each other, but it just wasn't enough interaction for me between the narrative and conclusions and how the cats fit in. I just wasn't loving this book. I also think at one point a cat becomes symbolistic of Jesus, and that was where it really lost me. I was just like, what is going on? An interesting book that I read in pretty much a day was The Center by Ayesha Manazir Siddiqi. So this one is following a woman who is South Asian, and she is a linguist and really interested in translating and languages. She meets Adam, who is also a linguist, and when Adam doesn't seem to understand Urdu at all, but then learns it within the span of 2 weeks to impress her family, she is instantly suspicious and gradually pulls out of him that this center center exists that's highly secretive, and if you pay a certain amount of money, you can go there and learn any language with native fluency within 2 weeks. And she is very curious about this center. She wants to know what's going on there, so she decides she's going to undertake the course and figure it out, what's going on there for herself. This book was just okay. The premise, fantastic. The story, what an idea. But it just fell flat. I do think in the beginning there was a lot of tell over show, and that bothered me a lot. It was like introducing Adam so that he could introduce the center and then shove Adam to the side. There was a lot of convenient plot setup, so it took me a while to get into the story, but the way I did was through our main character. She is an unlikable main character, and if you know me and my channel, you know that I don't tend to get along with unlikable characters at all, but for some reason I liked this unlikable character. I was here for her. I was so curious about the ways in which she was so quick to judge everybody else and call everybody else out, but could not see her own flaws, could not see how and when she was doing the same things herself. That fascinated me. I love that it focused on the language of words and translation and the power of that, and she was so passionate about that. And then the whole setup with the center and what was or wasn't going on there was so intriguing. It's safe for me to say that I did not see the twist coming. I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I knew all of the answers and I was very confident in myself, but I was entirely wrong, and I loved that. I loved the direction that it went into instead. I thought that was fascinating. But what this book really missed in, other than the beginning being a bit dry and stale and setting up the story too quickly and shoving characters around to reach the means of the middle, I also think the ending didn't land at all. It was very inconclusive in a way where it shouldn't have been inconclusive. We needed more answers. We needed more concrete next steps of what was going to happen since we had the twist. You can't give us the twist and then stop the book there before the characters decided what they're going to do with the twist. So for me, the ending just really did not work. It needed more. There needed to be another 50 pages to 100 pages where things actually happened in light of the plot twist that was revealed to us. And even though I liked her as an unlikable main character, I do think she was starting her redemption arc towards the end, and if we'd known what she decided to do after the plot twist was revealed to us, I think we could have had a better understanding of where and how we should feel about her character at the end. So unfortunately, this just didn't manage to stick the landing or beginning for me, but the middle was quite good and I read this very, very quickly. Even though it's a book that's at a slow pace, it never got boring, which I find quite fascinating. I know I mentioned what would I do without Bayview High? Well, I immediately decided I needed more young adult thrillers, so I read How to Find a Missing Girl by Victoria Wlosok, and this is a young adult murder mystery with a bit of a missing girl element to it. We're following our main character, Iris, who is pansexual, and a couple of years ago her sister went missing. Fast forward a few years where we are in this narrative, and now her ex-girlfriend has gone missing, and she believes that there is something suspicious happening here and that the two of those happenings are linked, even though they were a few years apart. She also has an amateur detective agency between her and her friends. Her friends are all wonderfully queer, which is nice to see. We have a like non-binary character, we've got like gay characters, you've got the whole range, you've got characters whose parents are gay. It's all fantastic in terms of the queer representation, just casually being thrown in but not being the point of the story. And they decide, this detective amateur agency, that they are going to pry into the case and find out what happened. Now, I've mentioned how I read Bayview High trilogy for the characters more so than the plot, and if you are a young adult thriller reader who actually wants to be involved in the mystery, who actually wants to be involved in a plot with lots of action and suspense and tension to it and clues that you can puzzle out and piece together yourself, then this is the book for you. It's definitely got that, and it relies more heavily on making sure that the plot is really good. It has a lot of twists and turns. I didn't see where things are going. It also has the mixed media format to it because it's got podcast in this one, and the podcast is called How to Find a Missing Girl, so you get to see the episodes of that read, which is nice. I did like our character. I do think she sometimes hit the bill of some very typical young adult tropes of like, you don't want to get in trouble so you don't tell people things, you feel like you have to do everything on your own, and I've read that all before, but do you know what, it's still nice to read it again. So while I do think her character was a bit typical in some senses, I was still happy enough reading about her, and I think the mystery and the clues kept me entertained enough, as well as it being like a new perspective, because we do have a pansexual main character, which is lovely. I think the ending had a lot of action going to it, like a lot happens really near to the end, which is fascinating and means I was turning those pages very quickly. I do also think this one does fall into, unfortunately, even though you've got lots of clues and you've got a lot that you can solve, the main character doesn't figure things out. The detective agency, they piece together little elements, but they don't figure things out. There's a lot of twists that they don't see coming, and so they do need the villain to explain and reveal everything to them. Once again, that's just not my preferred method of ending for thriller mysteries, so I didn't love that element to it. But when I finished this book, I was thinking, this is the kind of young adult thriller mystery that I want to read next. I've read the Bayview High trilogy. I want to read more ones like this because it was fun and it was entertaining and it was queer and it was lovely and it had a lot of action and tension to it. That's exactly what you want when you pick up a young adult thriller murder mystery. So this was really, really good and I recommend it. The Pale House Devil by Richard Kadrey, and this took me by surprise. I loved it. I had such a fun time. It's a horror novella, so again a very short one that you can whiz through, and you're following two detectives, or actually I should say you're following two assassins. I love a good assassin story. One of them is alive and one of them is an undead zombie, and the undead zombie can only kill people who are alive, and the alive one only kills people who are undead, and that is how their partnership was formed, and that is why they are such a good duo. And when they get this really strange job that has to do with a monster living in a house, it's kind of talking about how they handle it and how that all unravels. I loved it. I had such a good time. It's very short, but it gets straight to the point. I was amazed by how quickly it set up the world. I easily understood how the undead live alongside the humans. I understood how the undead are discriminated against and kind of what that entailed, how they manage to stay undead or how you become undead. It very cleverly, I will say, managed to weave all of that world building into the first quarter of the story in a way that didn't feel like was information dumpling, but actually contributed and built on the narrative. You've also got those two assassins, as I mentioned, who work together, and I loved their vibe. They can finish each other's sentences. They are always on the same wavelength, and that level of like loyalty and friendship and trust between those two men was absolutely lovely to read about, and it just made for such not cute banter, because the banter was usually about who they're going to kill next, but it made for very entertaining and fun banter to read. You get introduced to Tilda, who is a female character who kind of weaves her way into the story. I liked Tilda, I liked how she was represented, I liked how they treated and interacted with her. It was really, really fun. I did think the ways in which this monster that was living in this house was handled was quite interesting, because I definitely thought the plot was going to be more straightforward than it was, and kudos to the book for managing to make the storyline a bit beefier than I thought it was going to be. It was just a whole ray of sunshine and a lot of fun, and I'm actually not ready to leave this world. I want more than a novella. I would read a whole novel set in this world following this set of characters, and I sincerely hope that this becomes the first book in a series, because I will read another one and another one after that and another one after that as well. I read a graphic novel. So this graphic novel I read was called The Hills of Australia Roja, and this is by Ashley Robin Franklin. So this is a creepy graphic novel. You can tell I was in the mood to read horror last month still, even though October was over. And in this one we're following these two girls, and one of them is visiting this town where there are these really weird red lights in the distance at night because of the fact that her grandmother has died, but her family seems to be really strange and she doesn't seem like she fits in. And then the other girl hears about these strange lights online and is kind of curious and is really into busting myths and like the strange and the weird and maybe the mythical, and wants to find out if there's aliens behind these lights. So she comes to town to investigate, but nobody in this town wants to talk to her, wants to interact with her, and they're all telling her to move on. So what this graphic novel did really, really well was it had a lovely colour palette. I don't get to have the whole colour palette because this is a proof, but I did like the purples and the oranges and how the colours were done in this. I also think it did a very good job of having that small town, something is clearly not right with this town vibe. The atmospheric build-up was really, really well handled and well done. I do think where the story went at the end with the creepy elements to it, it just wasn't where I thought it was going to go, and it was wrapped up really quickly, and I just wanted a bit more from it. But I understand that this is a graphic novel and it was kind of building the queer relationship for a lot of it, so it didn't focus on the spooky elements as much as I wanted it to. So I read this young adult book called The Changing Man by Tomi Oyemakinde, and this is a young adult book that has got creepy element vibes to it, but I will hesitate to call it a horror. I think it was really marketed and pitched as a horror, but it does feel more puzzly mystery with a few light spooky elements to it. This is one of those young adult books that falls into the age category of 12 to 15, so do bear that going in mind. It's like the younger end of young adult, and in this one we're following this girl who goes to a new school in this town. The new school is really prestigious, but they also have a lot of students who happen to go missing when they apply for this grant all the time, and she kind of forms an unlikely band of friends who are all involved in figuring out what is going on. I think this book was okay. I did feel disappointed by the fact that I was going in expecting a full-on horror young adult, and then I got something that was just a bit murder mystery above all else. A lot of the time is spent on the school drama and the stories that people are telling, and then figuring out elements before we get to the what is actually going on bit, and so I was just a bit less enthralled with all of that high school drama and puzzling that was happening, because I really did want to go into this for something dark rather than something that feels a bit more close to the everyday element. I did think the idea and concept behind it was smart. I just didn't fall in love with any of the characters. I didn't really connect to them. I didn't really feel for them. I think some of the trio that we do follow get more time and development than others. Like Ben's development felt a bit stale, but I really liked the one of her and the friend that she makes who is always trying to be closer to her and she keeps pushing her away. I did like their relationship a bit more. The ending was the ending. It was satisfactory. It wrapped up realistically in terms of like the narrative that it was telling, and it did things. It did things. It was a good story. It's just not one that I particularly loved myself. Last but not least, I read The Undying of Obedience, Wellrest by Nicholas Bowling. This is a young adult historical book. It's again one of those young adult books that skew onto the younger age, so think 12 to 15, and it's about this boy who lives in a cemetery and people are robbing the cemetery of the bodies and they're trying to protect it and figuring out why. And then you're also following this girl who is 16 and her father is trying to marry her off. We're in historical England, by the way, so 16 is marriable age, and she is being auctioned off to this scientist who she has no interest in whatsoever, and it's about how those two stories connect. I was going into this because of the like cemetery story. Anything set in cemeteries I'm particularly fascinated by, but this did become a bit more historical mystery than I expected it to, and so again I had to readjust my expectations, but for what we got I think this book was just okay. I liked the cemetery setting to it. I did actually like the historical setting to it. I think that worked well for the vibe and energy the book was trying to bring across. I liked the plot beats. I think I didn't predict where this book was going. It weaved around a lot of story elements, but I had a good time being along for the ride. I enjoyed where we got to by the end. I think the plot was good. I liked the plot. It wasn't the plot I was going in to read, but I was happy with what I got. So none of my complaints come with the plot. A lot of my complaints do come with the characterization, unfortunately. I think the female main character, the one who's called Obedience that we're following, she really, really annoyed me. I found her very, very unlikable. She would very quickly judge people for doing something and then turn around and do almost the exact same thing herself. She also was surprisingly close to the villain in this book, and it was interesting because the book did call it out and it commented on the fact that she was quite alike to the villain, but it didn't develop that enough in terms of consequences for her actions, and I don't think she fully reflected enough for my liking by the end of it. She also treats her love interest horribly, like horribly, and I think we're supposed to be supportive of their relationship at the end, but I didn't feel it at all. I didn't feel any chemistry between them. I feel like she was quite mean and also very, very belittling to this love interest. Now, the male main character in this one reads as autistic. I just didn't like how it was handled, unfortunately. I don't think it was done badly, but it just niggled away at me, and it meant I just didn't get on board with his character. I didn't like his character as much, and it's okay for him to be a bit behind the grain of all the other characters. He didn't figure things out as fast, or he just never figured things out at all, and he needed to be told directly everything, and that's fine, but it did contribute to him being belittled as a character by a lot of people, and that bothered me, the way that they just saw him almost as an infant child that needed to be explained every single element. I think there's a way to write a character like that where it doesn't feel as belittling as it did in this one. And then the last thing I'm going to say about this book that I struggled with is that our villainous character in this one is disabled, and it just kind of fell into the box of like the disabled character is the villain, and I just don't really like reading that. So I found this book was okay. I could see why some people would like it and it'd be a lot of fun because it had a lot of twists and turns, but it didn't tick all my boxes. So there you have it. Those are the first half of the books that I read in the month of November. Please stay tuned to hear about the rest of my reading. Let me know in the comment section down below, what was the last young adult or adult book that you read? What did you think of it? Let me know your rating. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!